Доброе утро. Good morning. Have we got any English speaking attendees here? Okay, one. All right, just for you, sir, I'm going to speak in English. Is everybody else fine with English? All right, cool. I need some rotten tomatoes to throw. Английский подходит всем, да? Вы слушали keynote вообще? Я надеюсь. Ну что, начнем тогда. Let's start. Luckily, I have all my slides in English. So, my name is Vitaly K. I come from Kaspersky Lab. I'm based in Singapore, and I'd like to present something from the world of security to you developers. Something that may be of interest to you, something relevant. I am currently principal security researcher, and I've been with the company for 14 years now. Just a few words about myself. I spent also, in addition to working for Kaspersky Lab, which is, as you know, endpoint security solution developer company mainly, I also spent a couple of years working at Interpol in Singapore, helping them with cybercrime investigations, digital forensics, and things like that, developing tools sometimes, promoting them to law enforcement officers, and so on. I'm also an author of this small open source project, probably not interest to you. It's written in Bash. It's a live CD builder for those who are interested in remote digital forensics. It's available on GitHub if you're interested. So I'm actually keen on digital forensics, reverse engineering. So basically it's the reverse process, what you do, you code, and some bad people do as well. They code malicious software. My role is to actually understand what they've written, dealing with the binary code only. So I do deal with binary objects. I need to reconstruct pseudocode that matches the binary. And answer many questions on the way, of course. I am occasional developer. I'm not a big professional C++ developer, but I'm familiar with the language, of course. I did code in this in the past, and I do code from time to time in C. A few words about my team. I'm part of a team called GREAT. It stands for Global Research and Analysis Team. It's a great name as well. Actually, when it was first formed in the company, there were some skeptics. I'm among the skeptics because I was not part of GREAT at that time. And we formed a coalition that was called CREP, so that we get clear separation. Well, jokes aside, this team was created by Eugene Kaspersky himself, the founder of the company, to deal with the most advanced cyber attacks and most advanced threat actors. So we're kind of a SWAT to some extent in antivirus company. So we come and help people where there is a serious trouble, like some pandemic by network worm, or a big vulnerability that threatens the world, like you probably have seen the RDP vulnerability news recently, and many other things like tracking nation state sponsored attacks, professional cyber espionage, and things like that. So we deal with the hardest nuts, basically. We have to crack them. Just a few words of credits to these two beautiful ladies based in Australia, because they actually prepared the content for the core of this presentation, which I, on their permission, deliver here. One of them, they're both sisters, twins. They live in Australia. One of them is my close colleague. We work in the team in GREAT. And they focused on the research related to backdoors discovered in the compilers. So I just wanted to say a word of credit to these awesome researchers. Well, our agenda today is, first of all, to understand basically how do we trust a piece of software. Then we'll go through some history of this problem and speak about some of the real world attacks that we have discovered. And not only us. First of all, speaking of trusting a piece of software, how can people trust something that was created, a binary object, an executable? How do you trust your software that is installed on your machines, your operating system, your third-party software, your components, libraries, whatever? Do you have full confidence that there is nothing malicious hidden inside of it? it's sometimes very challenging. I can tell you, even from my own experience, after looking into the code, into the binary, and then uncovering what's hidden there for more than a decade, I cannot be sure that all the components on even my machine are free from potential backdoors, because sometimes they're very, very subtle. They are very hard to discover. Just to give you an example, of course, there are many, many examples of such things, but one of the most recent, and the reason why I mentioned this case, maybe some of you heard about the backdoored ASUS live updater tool. Who's using ASUS here in the room? Can you raise your hands? Nobody. Okay, a couple of people. Good. So you should be concerned, and probably just one example, of course, everybody else should be concerned too. So what happened here, we discovered in end of January that there was some weird code inserted and when working inside of the ASUS digitally signed binary, which was ASUS live updater tool that comes pre-installed on most of these machines from ASUS. Apparently, all other vendors have something similar, tool to maintain drivers, utilities, whatever, and they do the automatic update of those components. Now, what happened is unusual because we normally find some modified or tempered software written by some big developers, reputable companies. But this case was different because the digital signature was intact, it was valid, which means that not only somebody messed with the software, but also probably somebody messed with the software on the side of the developer company. So they probably breached the company, they got a hold of the server responsible for digital signature, or probably even stole digital certificates, which completely undermines trust to the vendor, right? So they could push malicious software to thousands of people. And that case was like very, very big because they also, as you know, ASUS probably has hundreds of thousands or even millions of users. They also didn't try to infect each and everyone. So they selected like 400 plus targets that were verified by the MAC address of the network cards installed on the system. And if the MAC address hash matched the target, they would only then they would try to initiate network connection and download additional malicious payload, or next stages as we call it, to pass control of our infected machine to the bad guys. So it was, in normal conditions, it was silent. It was like radio silence, and nobody noticed this for months. They were active in 2018 from May to November. There were some people who noticed some strange anomalies, like the binary was created in 2015 and ASUS decided to push it in 2018, but it was discussed on Reddit threads, but then they validated signatures, so like no antivirus detects it, signature is valid, so it must be just weird developer behavior, unexplained, it's nothing malicious and doesn't generate any malicious traffic. So there were people who were very paranoid and suspicious, but even those people missed it. Why I mention this, because this is connected to a threat actor that I'm going to mention throughout the presentation, because we believe they are responsible for this attack. Now, let's answer these basic questions. Do you trust every application to be safe from malicious behavior? Apparently not, and this example of ASUS shows this clearly. But what is your approach to trust the applications that you use? How do you validate that the vendor, reputable company, has not shipped you with the backdoor inside? It's not easy. You can try to rely on antivirus, but I can tell you, working for an antivirus company, that we only see what we know. We sometimes can try and predict code that was modified, but still, if there's something completely new, we need to analyze it first in the lab. We need to create a way to detect and see this pattern in other software. So it's not 100% reliable, of course. Maybe you buy or download from trusted sources, but what is trusted source? Like, do you trust what company? Do you trust ASUS now? Well, some people started to hesitate, but any company can be a target. Any. Even us, we were a target as well. We were breached by professional nation-state-sponsored attackers who burned $1 million exploits on us to get into our network. And this is public. So it's really hard to judge which source is trusted. Now, maybe you can spend your time as developers examining the source code of application, right? But can you be sure that you find all the subtle and indirect backdoors hidden there, or vulnerabilities that were carefully planted to provide attackers with potential buffer overflow and then make them exploit this? It's really hard, right? So we are fighting to find all those bugs and remove them just to prevent crashes. But there are things that are not even crashing your application in most of the conditions. So they can be carefully hidden there. So maybe you even compile these applications yourself from the source code, like, all these source-based Linux distros where you rebuild the world of the tools and services that you create. Maybe it gives you some confidence, right? But again, the vector can be still in there. And how about that compiler that you use? Even if you verify the source code, if you spend a lot of time and money and people hours to check that, do you trust the compiler that you use to compile that application? Or shall you trust? Now, speaking of the compiler backdoors, now let's go into the history and learn from this. Are you familiar with the ACM Turing Award? So that's the award given to some significant achievement in computing. So there is one in 1983 that was given to these two gentlemen with nice beards, Dennis Ritchie and Ken Thompson, known as the inventors of Unix. So these two smart guys were particularly interesting because they worked on something back in 80s that is relevant. So they thought about the backdoors integrated into compilers as potential threat. So this is a quote from Ken Thompson. To what extent should one trust a statement that a program is free of Trojan horses? Perhaps it is more important to trust the people who wrote the software. So even he wasn't sure that we can reliably verify that the software or the source code is free of backdoors. We really have to trust people that created this, that they don't have any malicious intention, because there are so many ways to hide something inside there. They also did, Ken Thompson did, interesting research and published this white paper on backdoors integrated into compilers in the 80s. So not only his described compiler inserted the backdoor into the target application, specifically defined by, let's say, project name or the executable name, but also it detected when the compiler was used to compile a compiler, right? So that if somebody doesn't trust this compiler, he may try and compile a different compiler, right? So whenever the compiler whenever attempted to compile a compiler was detected, this backdoor compiler would insert the backdoor code inside of this compiled project, right? So that the newly created compiler will also behave the same way. It will keep spreading the infection to further binaries. Let's go even further. In 1984, the US Air Force did an interesting review, security review of the operating system they were using. It was called Multics or Multics, not sure. But this was used in very, I guess, strictly protected networks. And their evaluation was about how reliable it is, how secure it is. Is it okay to use it in the military? And the report basically concludes that the typical threats for this operating system were related to something that they called trapdoor, which is basically related to the malicious compiler that is used to create the executables. So while the source code was clean, they were concerned about how this source code can be converted into binary before it's being used. So most of the threats were coming from the development environment, not from the operating system itself. Maybe enough for security concerns from the past. Let's talk about the real cases, if it's happening at all or not. Shall you really be concerned, or it's all just theoretical research from the 80s? So let's talk about examples of real attacks. So Xcode Ghost. Who knows what is Xcode Ghost? Have you heard about this before? Any developers for macOS here? One. Xcode Ghost 2, you know it? Not really? Okay. So you know what is Xcode? Hopefully. I should have started from that, right? What is C++? Okay, so Xcode, for those who are not coding at all, for OS X, it's the development environment, the official one from Apple. So Xcode Ghost is the name for an attack that involved a backdoored Xcode distributive, and it was discovered in 2014 because of some anomalous and strange behavior of compiled OS X applications. So it was traced back to the compiler that was used to create those binaries. And the applications would occasionally establish network connection with some predefined server, hard-coded, and they would pass system information, and they could download additional components that could extend the capabilities of the code with unlimited backdoor functionality. So this happened and was distributed mainly in Chinese websites. So that's why there are probably so few people who heard about Xcode Ghost here in this room. So they were distributed through Baidu, through many websites. So whoever did this also took care of wide distribution of this development environment, the backdoored one. And why it was so efficient in China? Probably because there is no direct connection, or maybe just slow when you download from official Apple servers from China. At least in before 2014, it definitely was that. And many of the developers would go to a local mirror and download, even if that mirror was a third party and untrusted site. So they would create mirrors like maybe FTP servers or just any kind of HTTP service, and those mirrors contained the backdoor version of Xcode. They also, I think, try to insert something into iOS applications. I'm not quite sure, but definitely for the OS X, there was about 4,000 apps that were discovered to be backdoored. Now, let's look into how the malicious compiler works. Basically, the idea is, of course, to blend some malicious code with the benign code during the compilation. So it can be done in the binary form or in the source code form, right? In this particular case, I think they just attached the malicious object core services, which was added into the source code of the project during the compilation. Let's move further to the case of Shadowpad, and this one is related to the ASUS compromise from this year. They were also responsible for a number of compromises before this year. That's the name of the attackers group. We call them Shadowpad. Don't ask why. Anyway, they were known for first. They were known for a breach of a South Korean company called Netsurang Computer. So this South Korean company, they are producing SSH software. So they make custom their own versions of SSH clients and even SSH servers. They are rather popular in certain circles of administrators, and I know several really large companies that are using their software. So they provide this enterprise management software, so to say. So what one of our customers discovered one day, I think it was 2016, they came to us and said that they observed a strange DNS traffic coming out of their servers. So that traffic, it was basically just requests that contained a domain name which looked suspicious to them. The domain name was very long. It was like about 50 or 60 characters long, consisting of randomly selected ASCII characters with like several levels of subdomains. And they asked us, like, is this normal? Is this okay? Like, it definitely looks shady, but they couldn't track it to particular software or component on their system. So we had to come and make a memory dump and inspect what generated those DNS queries. Oh, you'll be surprised that sometimes even Windows creates randomly looking domain names in legitimate traffic. So you can never be sure, like, is this like real malicious behavior, or is this just weird tests of operating system that is done? If you don't trust me, just look into the traffic created by your Windows 10. Look into DNS queries as well. So in that particular case, we tracked it down to this software called X-Shell. It was an SSH client installed on that machine. And one of the DLLs contained an injection which looked like a malicious injection because the code wasn't present in plain text. It was encrypted and stored as a binary object inside of the executable that would be decrypted on the fly when you run the application. And the decrypted version of it, of course, was a shellcode that would create these queries. So if the DNS infrastructure, the global DNS infrastructure, somehow responds to those packets, it could be it could deliver a response in a similar way, like just randomly looking gibberish ASCII text that could be decrypted by the recipient application and get the IP address and the port where to connect next for the next stage. So it was like very, very short bootstrapping code. And then further components would be pushed on demand. Only if the target is really interesting to the target, to the attackers. So in this case, the bad guys also managed to compromise companies so deeply that those binaries were also digitally signed. It was valid digital signature by rather reputable developer at the time. So this is the composition of the backdoored DLL that was used. I think it was related to the network functions. So there was some network functionality in the DLL itself, and attackers carefully selected that to, of course, stay below the radar. And that DLL was originally creating some network traffic, so they seamlessly integrated into this. It just added extra traffic and didn't cause any suspicions for a long time, at least from the developer's side. So this is the composition of the injection. The malicious shellcode that was part of it would decrypt the second stage that contained plugins, and those would establish the communication with the command control center. So how it looked on the developer system. So in that case, they used a backdoor in Microsoft Visual Studio. So they took a linker from Visual Studio and modified this. And they inserted a module called mscore.ee.dll. Many of you should recognize this. It's one of the standard libraries to provide the .NET framework support. So what they added in this DLL that was loaded automatically from disk from the current directory, they added some functions that were declared obsolete. And this is how they made sure that there would be no real call from the original executable to these exported functions. So they were deprecated, but they could use it for loading their own shellcode by inserting a jump from the entry point of the library. So what was interesting in this case as well is that the malware came with an encrypted piece of code that was inserted into the project during the compilation. So eventually, when you did compile it, you could find a source code that contained a large array of some values, just integers. Because the malware did this, they injected once, and every time you compile, it comes with the source code, basically. You could discover this in the source code. Let's talk about another case, because this was not the only one. The CCleaner incident. Do you know such tool, CCleaner? It's used for optimizing registry, cleaning your system from whatever cache files, and many other things. I think in 2017, a company called Avast Security Company acquired the developer company called Piriform that created this CCleaner software. So in the same year, it was discovered that CCleaner that is installed on millions of machines with digital signature was breached in a similar way. So the attackers managed to insert code that would, in the same scenario, would follow additional stages from the network and would target specific victims. So the victims' identities were not hard-coded into the malware; they were pushed on demand by the attackers after they collected the basic system information from the victim machine. So as far as it was a big concern to the vendor who acquired this company, Avast, they did a very thorough analysis of the components that were available. They managed to find like the latest stages delivered to very selected victims, and then they found even the list of victims that were pushed to the second stage. One of the victims, by the way, was Asus company, Taiwanese vendor. Well, at least they mentioned this as it was a legit target that received stage 2. We don't know like what happened after that, but in 2017 they managed to push this to Taiwanese office of Asus. So basically, the malware itself was probably not an interest to you. It just provides the general capabilities like to collect keystrokes, grab all the secrets, monitor the user, transfer files back and forth. Mainly used for stealing information, stealing digital certificates, source code, whatever trade secrets you may have for their own advantage, either economical or commercial, or do intelligence. Now, speaking of the fresh shadow pad attacks, I wanted to show you this case that was linked to Asus story. Because when we started analyzing these backdoor Asus binaries, we found that they were not actually modified on the compiler level, and this is visible. Like the attackers took a binary from 2015 created by Asus, then they patched it on top of it. So somebody had reverse engineered the executable from Asus, and then they injected malicious code, overwriting some of the code. And they would modify it over and over again by changing the payload. And the payload contained new profiles of the targets, new MAC addresses. So that if you have just one executable, you cannot see all people or all MAC addresses that were targeted. You can only see a fraction of it. So they made it in series and distributed several times by changing these MAC addresses. Anyway, in this story of Asus, we started looking for what other binaries can be compromised. We wanted to find them all. So we made a generic detection for such injections, and we came up with many other, well, there were at least 3 different other vendors that had digitally signed binaries. They were video gaming vendors from Asia. They had digitally signed binaries with malicious injection inside, very similar to what we observed, with quite similar code and even some algorithm reused from the Asus case. This is why we linked it to the same attacker or same shadow path threat actor. And those binaries from video gaming companies, they were definitely created in a different way. So they were not patched, precompiled executables. The malware code was seamlessly integrated into the executable, as if it was done during the linking process. So we made a guess that it could be related to compile linker, or of course it could be also a backdoor in the source code, which puts the blame on the developer, right? So we started looking and we found a Trojanized linker. So here you can see here on the screenshot the compromised linker, which has invalid signature by Microsoft. Apparently, they couldn't get into the Microsoft infrastructure to make digitally signed backdoored compiler. So they just, broke the signature. That was fine because nobody cares about digital signature of your compiler, right? Do you really care? Do you check? Is it valid or not? Visual Studio accepts everything. Like link.exe, doesn't matter like who created this. It could be your own. So it didn't work well in this case because this linker, of course, inserted the backdoor code into the executable. And we even managed to find the original link.exe, which was not backdoor, because apparently when they backdoor, they have to overwrite some data. It was a challenge even to find the original one signed on the same date. But yeah, by finding this, we could diff it and see what exactly was added there. So what was added, they extended something called IAT. It stands for import address table. This is what your executables request from the operating system. Normally, when you declare using some functions like API functions, it will be automatically listed in the import address table, along with the DLL libraries that are providing those. So they added another DLL into this table. So what it means is when your executable is loaded by Windows, the first thing that happens, Windows does this dynamic linking of the code. So it will go and find and load from disk all those DLLs listed in the table and execute every DLL entry point, which means kind of a main function, okay? A pre-main function. So it will run some code from the DLL on disk. So if you inject entry into this import address table that points to your DLL, it will get loaded from disk when the executable is started, and this code will be run during initialization. That can do pretty much anything. So what they did, they set up some hooks to specific functions. Let's see, the malicious DLL is this one. We don't reveal the name. So there was a DLL with one import function underscore CO DLL main that looks kind of legit, but they always pick some names that may confuse. Like it looks like I don't know, one of the framework or standard libraries. However, what they modified was run from the DLL main, and this is a pseudocode you can see here, basically a screenshot from the tool we use in Directed Disassembler that helps us to create a pseudocode from the assembler that speeds up the analysis. So they do here they did redirect access to msvcrt.lib file. So whenever the linker needed the standard lib file, msvcrt.lib, the malicious code would actually check the name of the project that was used, or the executable that was to be compiled. And if it matched the target, they would actually redirect the file to another one. So they would replace msvcrt.lib with a different file called msvcrmt.lib, which is, you know, really easy to miss that when you do check even like what files are being accessed, like whether this is standard or not. So there's extra character, right, comparing to the original one. And then they would also link to the msvcrt.lib. So they had their own lib file prepared, deployed on that development environment that would contain the malicious code to be inserted into the project that was compiled. So overall, this is the diagram showing how it all happens. So they were very careful to even hard code the name of the executable to be backdoored. They were after video games, so they knew when they deployed this backdoored compiler, they knew what projects are the most important, what is the name of executable for video game, and then they would insert the backdoor only into the video game, not any other, which was smart. I'll explain you why. So coming closer to conclusions, so what your compiler lies to you, it will look like well, first of all, your product will always, your executable will always contain a backdoor, right? Because however you change the source code, it will always be there because it is added during the linking stage after you created the source code. Then it will probably get smoothly digitally signed because normally, like after you create it, you can have very clean environment and secure way to deliver it to the sign-in server, and the backdoor will already be there, so it gets smoothly digitally signed. Developers are unaware of this, and nobody verifies really the code after it was already digitally signed, because digital signature is something that guarantees that nobody tampered the binary. If it's broken, then like it's broken. You don't trust this, right? But it's not broken in all these cases. Now, the injection also looks like the developer created it on purpose. When it's part of the linker, it just looks like there is an extra maybe C++ file that contained the backdoor body. So it is seamlessly integrated into the whole executable. So some people can come and blame the developers, and we'll probably check them on lie detector if they put the backdoor on purpose. They will try to run some code review perhaps to find the backdoor with no results apparently, right? Because it's not there. The source code review will not reveal anything. And if you suspect that your compiler is backdoored, you may try and compile a dummy project, right? That's the first thing to do, to see if the backdoor code is there or not. Like you create hello world and see what it does other than just printing hello world. And it will do nothing. There will be no backdoor. At least it was the case for this shadow pack story, because they checked what executable you're trying to compile. If that's not the target executable they are interested in, they would not add the backdoor. So your dummy projects, if they are named differently, they will not pass this check. And this is something that Ken Thompson, I think, brought up back in the 80s. Now, if you are a software developer, I hope everybody here is, do really ask yourself, where does your development software come from? Like, do you trust this website? Is it coming from a mirror? Could it be tempered? Was it delivered in the right way? Do you download from HTTP server or HTTPS or FTP? It is really important because, of course, there are many ways and vectors to attack developers. It can be man in the middle on the mirror owner. The owner of the mirror may not be aware of this attack and may be spreading this compromised development environment. So be very careful and validate whatever you install on your machines, because there are those people greedy or sponsored by nation states interested in intelligence, into getting to different networks, different customers, to collect intelligence and spy on nations. Sometimes you may think that you are not an important target, you will never be targeted, but you will be surprised, because sometimes they go several steps away from their real target. They attack people in the outer circles that are related directly or indirectly to their real target. So it is called supply chain attacks. They compromised ASUS not because they were interested in stealing ASUS secrets. No, they were probably interested in people or organizations who were very important, and they relied on ASUS software. So this is what is called supply chain attacks. And ask yourself, when was the last time you really checked the integrity of your compiler, of your development environment? Right now, Visual Studio and Xcode don't care about the validity of their components. They don't enforce. They will let you compile using any executables you put there. So those executables can be backdoored. And basically, this is my message to you. Stay safe. Be a little bit paranoid. Yeah, still don't freak out. If you find something, talk about this. Involve more people. If you want code security folks like myself, I'll be happy to hear your concerns or your paranoia. Thank you very much. It's time for questions. Any questions about compilers, malware, Kaspersky Lab, anything? Russian, English, okay? Russian. How about Belarusian? Размовляете? Вирус какой? Индюк. Инфицировал Delphi. Я не слышу про вирус индюк, честно. как-то не встречал. Ну, что я могу сказать? Во-первых, если это был вирус или троян?
Он поражал именно вот компилятор Delphi и результирующие бинарники, которые скомпилированы, получались инфицированы также, и он распространялся через них, собственно.
Очень интересно. Я с удовольствием бы, наверное, поищу, если вирус индюк, действительно. Если у вас какие-то есть ссылки, я с удовольствием посмотрю на это тоже. Но если это вирус, как правило, это он работает с исполняемыми файлами и вставляет как раз собственное тело, как правило. Это самораспространяющийся код. Тут немножко другая история. То есть вирусов на самом деле было достаточно много. Мне нужно по-английски говорить. Quick break in Russian. Sorry. Вирусов было много. Они заражают, в принципе, как правило, все исполняемые файлы. Им нужно распространиться как можно дальше. Это самореплицирующийся код. То, что мы говорим, о чем говорим сейчас, это троянец, который был предустановлен на конкретную девелоперскую машину, или это был дистрибутив, который был доставлен с троянским кодом внутри. Случай все равно интересный, я думаю, что связаны, и я с удовольствием посмотрю на это. Просто для того, чтобы добавить в коллекцию случаев исторических. Спасибо за комментарий. Other questions in Belarusian?
Можна я по-белоруску, коли ви розмовляєте? My question is, I think installed antivirus software should detect this problem, no?
Good question.
Why developer machine didn't have installed antivirus software?
Okay. Well, in those particular cases, many of those developers did have antivirus software installed. It did not detect, and it's not new. Like, it's not the antivirus software is not a magic pill that solves all your problems. Like I said, nobody can guarantee you 100% confidence that you're free from malware just because you have an antivirus. Antivirus is mainly the tool that helps people that have no experience or skills to check and basically maintain integrity of their own system. It's probably a product for just common users. For you techies, for you developers, it should not be a defense line. Definitely, you should maintain your own integrity of your own system yourself. You should validate where you download from, whether you trust it or not. You can do some tests yourself to verify if the software has backdoors or not. You can monitor it. You can debug it if you want. There are many ways, right? But for common people, there is no protection. They don't have any skills. They don't know how to use these tools. That's why we have antivirus, right? So does it detect now or not? Of course. As soon as we found it, the next same day was several hours after the signatures were released, and we could detect not only that particular executable but also similar variants. So there was some heuristics added and so on. But could it be detecting this upfront? I can answer this. Those attackers who created this software, malicious injection, they would download our antivirus as well as many other antiviruses. They will check if this software, security software, detects what they created. And if it detects, they will keep modifying this. They will keep reversing and understanding how it was exactly detected and how to bypass it, how to add a layer of encryption, how to make it invisible. So they will experiment with this in the lab, and they have almost infinite time for this, right? They have advantage. We are picking up after they created this. And the battle here is for time. The sooner we detect them, the better for the customers that rely on our solutions. So this is the ongoing battle that never ends. But don't be, don't live in the fantasies. Antivirus does what it can, and I hope you can explain how it does work and what to expect from this.
Hi. Considering a casual environment, a Linux environment, does installing compilers with system package management system implies enough security for developer to stay safe and cool?
Do you mean downloading compilers from
installing
repositories?
Standard package manager on this distro.
You're talking about Linux right now, right?
Yes.
Okay. So here you just rely on the trust that you put on the maintainers of the packages, right? Software packages. So basically, you verify integrity. Linux does normally by default verifies the integrity digital signature of the downloaded packages. So at least it prevents man-in-the-middle attacks, right? And it would not by default go and download from third-party websites. Like this is common practice for Windows users, right? Just Google or Yandex it and then download from whatever first site comes up. So this is exploited by the attackers. In Linux, there is no such problem because you normally install from a repository and the digital signature is validated and the software will not be installed if it's modified. But do you really trust those maintainers? There are hundreds and thousands of people, right? I do trust because they would probably not have a long history of creating and maintaining this software. Sooner or later it can be detected and then they will be blacklisted for life, right? So they're more or less verified people to some extent. And there are also security teams of every Linux distro that work on validating and looking for security issues, including malware injections.
So, considering a casual developer, to what degree he or she should put an effort to verify the tools he uses?
So what I could recommend to like a common developer, your main problem will probably not come from the compilers in this case, but think about the third-party libraries that you're using.
We have some time for the last question. No?
Like some of those user-maintained repositories, I know, not probably relevant for C++, but for Python, everybody can create their own and push their own libraries to the world. And a lot of people just don't care about security of those. They just care about functionality, to deliver fast to the customer, that's all. So a quick advice, like a last tip for all of you, for developers, after you create code, do check your executables from time to time for some anomalies, such as network traffic, where should not be network traffic, accessing the files where files should not be accessed, some sensitive files, I know, password files and things like that. So after you create the executable, you do it like, you don't need to do this every time. Do it randomly, once a month, once per 3 months. Just check whatever executables you created. You can validate also the size of executables. If something big was added, you will see that it's inflated comparing to the others. But do check randomly. This is what attackers do not expect. Thank you very much.